morning had started clear. Too clear, Jake Reynolds later thought, as if the calm itself had been a trick, a cruel prelude to what was coming. He had driven into the trailhead lot just after sunrise, his battered Toyota humming with anticipation. The mountains loomed above, their peaks jagged and dusted with the last remnants of spring snow. Birds called overhead, and the scent of pine needles hung heavy in the crisp air. Everything had felt right, the kind of morning that makes you believe. Nothing can go wrong. Jake wasn't new to the mountains. At 32, he had logged more backcountry hours than most. He worked as a photographer for an outdoor magazine, which meant his office was usually a hammock strung between trees or the edge of a cliff, waiting for golden hour. He was used to unpredictable conditions. He checked forecasts obsessively, double-checked his gear, and knew how to read the clouds. Still, he'd overlooked something that morning, or perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps the mountain had simply decided that this time it would take control. He shouldered his pack and began the climb up High Hollow Ridge, a trail rarely used in early spring due to landslides and weather shifts. That was part of the appeal, the solitude, the challenge. He'd always told himself that the danger was half the reward. He didn't notice the sky changing until it was too late. The clouds rolled, in fast, a wall of dark grey sweeping across the sky. 1 minute, sunlight danced on the treetops. The next, the light dimmed to an eerie twilight. Wind stirred the branches with a sudden intensity, rustling pine needles into whispers. Jake paused, scanning the horizon. No signal on his satellite phone. He cursed under his breath. He could turn back, he should. But the overhang he planned to camp beneath was just over the next rise, maybe half a mile. He could make it. He didn't. The rain came down in violent sheets, soaking him to the skin in minutes. Mud sucked at his boots as he picked his way along the ridge. Then came the wind, hurricane-like gusts that staggered him sideways. Visibility dropped to near zero. He never saw the loose rock. His boot caught the edge. His body pivoted unnaturally as gravity took over. He slid, then fell, hard. He heard the crack before he felt the pain. It hit a heartbeat later, white hot, radiating. From his shin, he screamed. No one answered. Jake didn't know how long he lay there, minutes, hours. Time had stopped mattering. The rain pounded endlessly. His mind looped between pain and the terrifying realization that no one knew exactly where he was. He hadn't left a detailed route, just a note at home saying, High Hollow. His girlfriend had left him last winter, citing his obsession with solitude. His parents were in Florida, retired and out of touch. He had always wanted to be self-reliant. Now that independence felt like a noose, he barely noticed the movement at first, a blur of golden fur against the darkened trees. The dog moved like a wraith, silent, purposeful. Jake blinked through the water and the fog in his mind. A Labrador, it didn't make sense. He hadn't seen a soul on the trail all day, but the dog wasn't lost. It moved like it belonged here. Hey, Jake rasped, his voice swallowed by the storm. The lab padded closer. Rain slicked its coat to its ribs, but it stood tall, alert. It sniffed him, eyes meeting his, deep brown, intelligent, calm. Then it gripped his jacket in its teeth and began to pull. Jake didn't remember much of the crawl, only pain, mud, and the dog's strength. Every inch they moved felt impossible. Every breath took effort, but the lab kept going. It would pull, then pause, look back, make sure Jake was still moving. It was like being guided by a seasoned rescuer. And when they reached the overhang, dry, ground protection from the wind, Jake broke. His chest heaved in sobs that weren't just from pain. They were from gratitude, from fear, from awe. The dog curled against him without hesitation, sharing warmth. Jake pressed his hand into the golden fur and felt a strange peace wash over him. Good boy, he whispered. You saved me. The dog didn't bark. It simply watched him with those knowing eyes. When he awoke, the dog was gone. Rescuers found him that morning, led by faint tracks and luck. The storm had passed but left the mountain scarred. Fallen trees, blocked paths. Jake's leg was broken in 2 places, and he was half frozen. As they lifted him into the stretcher, he muttered, "The dog?" "The Labrador, he pulled me to shelter." The ranger who'd found him looked puzzled. "What dog?" Jake explained haltingly, describing the color, the eyes, the strength. Another rescuer, an older man with a silver beard, turned pale. "That sounds like Ranger," he said quietly. "Search and rescue dog. Went missing in a storm 5 years ago. Never found the body. We thought he fell into the gorge." Jake's heart thudded. "Are you saying?" The ranger shrugged. "I'm saying you're lucky. Real lucky. Whether it was a dog, a ghost, or a damn miracle. Jake didn't argue, but as they carried him down the trail, he heard it. A single distant bark, joyful, faint. Jake's recovery was slow, but his thoughts were fast, racing in endless loops through the moment that dog first emerged from the trees. He was confined to a rehab center for nearly 4 weeks after surgery. Titanium pins held his fractured tibia together, and a nurse visited daily to monitor his vitals and coax him into physical therapy sessions. But his body wasn't the only thing healing. "I keep seeing him," he told Dr. Harriet Nye, a trauma psychologist assigned by the hospital. "That dog, in dreams when I close my eyes, it's like he didn't leave." "Survivor's mind," she said gently. "It's common after near-death experiences. You assign meaning, even faces, to the thing that saved you, especially if the truth is unclear." Jake didn't answer. She didn't believe, not really, but he'd seen that dog, felt its warmth. He wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't crazy. He kept researching newspaper archives, online forums, local ranger logs, anything he could find about a golden lab named Ranger. What he uncovered sent chills down his spine. Ranger had been legendary, certified. In avalanche rescue, wilderness tracking, and even cadaver location, the dog had saved more than a dozen hikers over a 7-year career. His handler, Garrett Morrow, had died of a heart attack just a year after Ranger disappeared. Some speculated the man never recovered from the loss. Others said Garrett died convinced Ranger was still out there. Jake found a photo in an old digital article. Garrett kneeling next to a beaming Labrador with a deep golden coat and familiar, soulful eyes. Jake stared at the image for hours. It was him, the same dog. Impossible. Yet something inside Jake, some quiet truth he couldn't silence, knew. He returned to the trail as soon as he could walk again. A cane supported him, and each step was careful, deliberate. He didn't hike far, just to the point where it all began. The slope where he fell was now marked with bright warning tape. A new sign had been posted: "Unstable ground. Use alternate route." He didn't go to the edge. Instead, he stood near the tree where the lab had first emerged. The wind shifted, pine needles stirred, and Jake could have sworn for just a heartbeat that the forest exhaled something familiar, something warm. He found the puppy a week later, or rather, the puppy found him. Jake had stopped at the local animal shelter in town. He hadn't planned to adopt, maybe just donate, maybe talk to someone about the lab. He didn't even ask about Ranger. The story sounded too strange, too ghostly, but then a volunteer brought in a small crate from the back. "Found him 2 days ago," she said, "near the old switchbacks past the hollow. Just wandering. No tags, no chip, friendly as can be." Jake's heart stopped when the puppy looked up at him. Golden fur, bright eyes, a small bark that echoed something deep inside him. No, it couldn't be. The worker smiled. "Looks like he likes you," Jake whispered without thinking. "Welcome home, Ranger." The puppy's ears perked. Jake took him home. Life slowly shifted. Jake moved to a cabin at the base of the mountain, closer to the trailhead. He told his editor he was taking time off, maybe indefinitely. Instead, he began writing down his experience. It started as a journal, then a memoir, then something else. A story, not fiction, a record. The puppy, named Ranger from the start, grew fast. He was smart, almost uncannily so. He responded to commands Jake hadn't taught him. He refused to sleep anywhere but near the door, and sometimes in the middle of the night, he would sit up, ears forward, staring toward the trees. Jake began to wonder. One day he took the young lab to the overhang where he'd been rescued. Ranger walked with purpose as if he remembered the way. When they arrived, the dog sniffed the stone, then let out a single bark, sharp, proud. Jake felt it again then, that impossible warmth, like a presence, a whisper in the wind. They weren't alone. It wasn't long before others started showing up. First, a woman named Erin searching for her brother who had gone missing 6 months earlier. Jake offered to guide her along the safe trails. He knew them better than anyone now. Ranger came too. They found the brother's trail, weeks old, faded, but it was Ranger who led them to the remains of a tattered jacket beneath a rock shelf. Erin sobbed. It wasn't the ending she hoped for, but at least it was an ending. Next came an older man, Harris, whose daughter had vanished years ago, and again somehow Ranger led them, not to her but to her necklace, buried beneath moss near a collapsed tree. The same tree that once bore a search notice stapled to its trunk. Word spread slowly, then rapidly. Jake tried to stop it. He didn't want attention, but people talk, whisper, hope, and hope is contagious. They called Ranger the Ghost Finder. Jake hated the name. He's real, he snapped at a reporter who tried to interview him unannounced. But the legend was growing, and Jake couldn't deny what was happening. Each person who came, each memory Ranger unearthed, brought something else too. Strange dreams, quiet voices on the wind, the feeling that something ancient lived in these woods, not dangerous, just watching. Jake started leaving offerings at the overhang. Nothing big, a bit of food, a carved stone, a photo. Ranger always sniffed them with reverence, and sometimes they were gone in the morning. Late one night, Jake awoke to Ranger growling softly at the door. There was no storm, no wind, just silence. Jake grabbed his flashlight and opened the door. Standing just beyond the tree line was another golden lab. Older, larger, proud. It was him, the original Ranger. The dog stared, eyes reflecting more than just the light. They held history, memory, gratitude. Young Ranger stepped forward and let out a small welcoming whine. The two dogs touched noses. Jake's heart thudded, then the older lab turned and slowly faded into the trees. Jake didn't follow. He didn't need to. He knew what it meant. Ranger was home. The past had passed on, and the legacy had been passed down. Jake couldn't sleep after seeing the elder lab, the original Ranger, at the tree line. The image replayed in his mind again and again. The proud stance, the wise eyes, the silent farewell. It hadn't been a dream. He was sure of it. But what haunted Jake most wasn't the ghost. It was the sense that something else had woken with the dog's return. Something beneath the mountain. Something old. A few days later, Jake found a note tucked beneath his front porch mat. No name, no return address, just a clean piece of folded parchment, written in dark blue ink. You've walked the boundary. The hollow sees, the hollow remembers, come at dusk. Come alone. There were coordinates beneath the words. Jake stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, too exact to be a prank. He plugged the coordinates into his GPS and frowned. They pointed to a spot miles off trail, beyond any marked route, deep in the forested slope that had once been carved by glaciers, a place even he had never dared explore. Ranger sat by the door, tail still, head tilted as if already waiting. Jake sighed. You want to go, don't you? The dog stood up and padded to the edge of the woods. Jake followed. They walked in silence for hours. The forest grew thicker, the trailless undergrowth swallowing sound. Even the birds were quiet here. The only sounds were their footsteps and the low rhythmic panting of the golden lab by his side. Just as dusk began to fall, they reached the place, a natural hollow hidden between ridges. The air here was warmer, surprisingly so. Moss covered everything. Trees leaned in strange angles, their bark pale and smooth like driftwood, though they were clearly living. In the center of the hollow was a stone, large, oval, worn smooth over centuries, covered in markings, not letters, but symbols, spirals, paw prints the shape of a hand and a leaf intertwined. Jake stepped closer. The moment his fingers touched the stone, the forest changed. No, the world changed. Sound fell away entirely. Even Ranger froze, ears up, eyes wide. A hum filled Jake's bones. Not a noise exactly, but a vibration. A presence. He closed his eyes and the stone whispered, not in words, but in memory. Dogs running beneath stars. Humans following them with firelight in their hands. Partnership, forged in ice and pain and trust. Every act of rescue, every bond of loyalty, stretching back farther than language, farther than history. This was the hollow the note spoke of, a place of memory, a place of guardians, and Jake was standing in it. When he opened his eyes, a figure stood across the clearing, a woman, old but strong, hair like braided ash, skin the color of earth, wrapped in dark wool and leather. Her eyes were pale, not blind but somehow seeing beyond sight. She said nothing, just raised a hand in greeting. Jake hesitated, then mirrored the gesture. Ranger stood perfectly still. I'm not dreaming, am I? Jake finally asked. No, the woman said. Her voice was like the trees, deep, slow, patient. But you're not quite awake either. Who are you? We are the keepers. We remember the old bonds, the ones written in fur and blood and loyalty. Jake frowned. You mean dogs? I mean the pact, she said, stepping forward. Before leashes, before names, before language, there was a bond. Your kind forgets. But she nodded to Ranger, never did. Jake looked down at the dog. Ranger's gaze was calm, accepting. You've walked the boundary, she continued. The edge of death. You were pulled back by the old spirit. You should not be here. Yet you... Jake's throat tightened. Was it really him? The first ranger? Yes. What remains of him? The hollow allows echoes, if they are strong enough. He stayed long past his time, waiting. For me, for the one who would carry the bond forward. She extended her hand. In it was a small pendant, carved from pale bone etched with the same spirals as the stone. Take it if you wish. But know this. Once you accept, you will always walk between. Between what? Life and memory. The past and the present. You will be a beacon. Others will come. The lost. The seeking. And you will guide them. Jake took the pendant. It was warm in his hand. And suddenly, he knew. Not facts. Not history, he remembered. Running barefoot beside wolves. Building fire while dogs curled beside him. Watching stars fall while guardians stood watch. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I remember, he whispered. The woman smiled, then vanished. In the months that followed, they came. Not in droves, not in crowds, but in ones and twos. Quiet people. People carrying photographs, broken things, stories heavy in their hands. Jake never advertised. He never needed to. They just knew. Some left tokens at the stone. Others camped nearby and spoke into the wind. Some brought dogs who lay at the edge of the hollow, watching the trees as if they could see things their owners could not. Ranger grew stronger, wiser. His gaze became older than his age. Jake taught nothing, offered no advice. He simply walked with them and listened. A year passed. One spring night, the wind shifted again. Jake woke to smoke. A wildfire, fast-moving, had ignited in the eastern valley. A campfire left unchecked. Foolishness. The flames devoured everything in hours. Jake grabbed his pack, his pendant, and Ranger. Together they sprinted toward the hollow. If the fire reached it, but it didn't. The fire reached the outer ridge and stopped. Locals later said the wind miraculously changed direction. Others swore they saw a golden blur running through the trees, herding deer, leading lost campers to safe paths. Jake never commented, but that night, at the edge of the scorched forest, he heard it again. A bark. Not Rangers. The original. Old. Proud. Still watching. Still guarding. Jake had always known the hollow was fragile. Not physically. Its stone, its trees, its moss-blanketed paths seemed impervious to wind or snow or fire. But spiritually it balanced on a thread. A quiet pact between the seen and unseen. As word of the hollow quietly spread, Jake took precautions. He never revealed exact directions, never allowed social media posts, but in a world full of noise, and hunger for answers, secrets don't stay buried long, especially not beautiful ones, and especially not powerful ones. His name was Dr. Elias Kent. He arrived in a black SUV with out-of-state plates, wearing hiking boots too clean for any real trail. A man who moved with sharp confidence, his hair too neat, his smile too practiced. Jake met him at the base of the trail. "You're trespassing," Jake said simply. "I'm visiting," Kent replied, adjusting the silver watch on his wrist. "Public lands, aren't they?" Jake didn't answer. Ranger stood between them, silent, watching. "I've heard stories," Kent continued, "about a man who guides people to closure, about a dog who knows how to find the lost. I'm not here to mock that. In fact," he opened a small leather case and revealed a tablet. "I'd like to help document it." Jake's stomach turned. Document. Study. It. Fund it. Preserve it. Under professional oversight. No, Kent's smile didn't fade. There's something ancient out there. Something we've barely scratched the surface of. And I believe it could rewrite our understanding of consciousness, memory, maybe even death. Imagine what we could achieve if we understand the mechanism. Jake stepped forward. "It's not a mechanism. It's a gift, a legacy." Kent shrugged. "Gifts can be studied, dissected, preserved. Otherwise they disappear." Ranger let out a low, warning growl. "Leave," Jake said. Kent did, but not before glancing toward the tree line and muttering, "For now." The next week, Jake found a trail camera, nailed to a tree near the hollow's edge. Not his. The lens was tiny but trained with clinical precision. He destroyed it. 2 days later, he found another, deeper in the woods, then a drone, then boot prints, dozens of them. He tracked one path to a hidden campsite buried beneath brush. It was empty, but someone had been logging the symbols on the central stone, marking them in red chalk, tagging them like specimens. Jake's hands trembled as he erased them. That night, the hollow went silent. No whispers, no warmth. Even Ranger seemed subdued, whimpering in his sleep. tail twitching at invisible specters. Jake stood at the stone and whispered, "I'm sorry." It happened 3 nights later. Jake awoke to Ranger's bark, shrill, urgent. He stumbled out of bed and found the dog circling the pendant on his desk. The bone-carved spiral glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Outside, the wind screamed. A storm was coming, not like the last one. Worse. Jake gathered his gear, threw on his boots, slung the pendant around his neck. Ranger waited at the door, alert. When they reached the hollow, they weren't alone. Kent stood at the center of the clearing, surrounded by 3 others, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in expedition gear, holding scanners, cameras, and cold expressions. "You need to leave," Jake shouted over the wind. Kent didn't move. "It's too late." The stone pulsed beneath his feet. The symbols glowed faintly, angry now, like burning coals. "We activated something," Kent said. "It's reacting to us." "No," Jake whispered. "It's warning you." Lightning split the sky. The wind howled, but the hollow held it back, barely. Jake stepped forward. "You don't understand. This place isn't passive. It's watching. You don't come here with machines. You come with memory, with grief, with hope." Kent's face hardened. "We're here for truth. You think this is sacred? It's data." The stone flashed. Suddenly the clearing shook. A sound like 1,000 barks echoed from nowhere and everywhere. One of the assistants collapsed, clutching their ears. The other screamed and ran, vanishing into the trees. Ranger stood unmoving, eyes locked on the stone. Then the earth cracked. A fracture tore through the clearing, splitting the stone cleanly in 2. Jake dropped to his knees. "No, no, no." The wind stopped. So did the light. And the warmth, the hollow, closed. Jake didn't know how he knew, but he knew. The bond had broken. They called it a minor earthquake. Localized. Strange, but not unprecedented. But Jake knew better. The pilgrims stopped coming. Animals stopped approaching the glade. The old trails grew darker, colder. Even Ranger changed. He was quieter now, slower. Jake still wore the pendant, but it no longer pulsed. It was cold, heavy, hollow. He hiked the ridge daily, praying for signs of the keeper, of the elder lab, of the whispers, but the hollow remained closed. Then one morning, Ranger didn't wake up. Jake found him beneath the same tree where the first Ranger had vanished. Peaceful, still. He buried him with trembling hands and whispered, "Thank you for the last time." Weeks passed. Jake was numb until the note came. Same paper, same ink, same simple message. One last chance. Come alone. This time, no coordinates, but Jake knew where. He returned to the hollow. The stone was still split, the clearing barren, but something stirred in the wind. The keeper stepped from the trees, her eyes sad. "You were warned," she said. Jake bowed his head. "I couldn't stop them." "I know. Is it lost forever?" "Not forever," she said. "But the hollow sleeps. Now wounded, healing. The bond must be remade, but not by you." Jake's heart cracked. "Then why call me here?" The keeper stepped forward and placed something in his palm. A single spiral-shaped seed. Pale, smooth. "Plant this. Guard it. It will grow in time. And the bond?" She smiled gently. "The bond is never truly broken, only forgotten. When the world remembers. Again, so will the hollow." Jake clutched the seed. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He nodded, then watched her fade into mist. Jake never left the mountain. He built a small cairn where the stone once stood, planted the seed beneath it, tended it through snow and sun. It grew slowly, unnaturally so. Its leaves were silver green, its bark spiraled in ancient patterns. One night, years later, a storm swept across the valley. Jake, now grey-bearded and quiet, sat by the window with a cup of tea, and in the distance, from deep within the trees, a single bark echoed. The world had moved on. Smart glasses, neural threads, augmented trails lit in real time across any peak with enough signal. Nature was still admired, but increasingly through lenses. But there were still quiet places, places the networks didn't reach, and some dreams, it turned out, still whispered louder than any device. Her name was Mira. She was 17, restless, half wild. She never quite fit. Her friends obsessed over VR concert feeds and hyper-edited travel loops. Mira walked in silence, pockets full of stones and leaves she couldn't name. She didn't like noise, she didn't like crowds, and for the last 6 nights in a row, she had dreamed of a dog, golden, strong, running through rain, always ahead, always waiting, until one night it turned and spoke. Not in words exactly, but Mira understood. Find the tree that remembers. When she woke up, her pillow was wet with rainwater, or maybe with tears. The dream led her north. She didn't know why, didn't tell anyone, not even her parents. She used money from an old birthday envelope, packed a journal, a scarf, and a flashlight. And the photo. It was old, faded. Her grandmother had kept it tucked in a carved wooden box, too fragile to tape into an album. The photo showed a young man in flannel, crouched beside a golden dog with knowing eyes. They were in a forest clearing, near a strange tree with spiraled bark. On the back, scrawled in faded ink, Jake and Ranger, 2032. The last beacon. Something in that name had always echoed in Mira's chest. A weight, a warmth. She didn't remember Jake, only that he had died before she was born, but his photo lived in her bones. She found it at dusk, tucked in a hollow valley between silent ridges, past the rusted remnants of a fire lookout, long lost to moss. The tree stood alone, its leaves glinting silver-green in the evening light. Its bark was pale and spiraled, its roots nestled in the stones of a half-collapsed cairn. Mira stopped walking. The air felt different here, thicker, warmer. She knelt before the tree, brushing her fingers over the bark. It felt like skin, like memory. A whisper, faint, curled through her mind. You came. She sat at the base and wept, though she didn't know why. That night, she dreamed again. This time she wasn't alone. The golden dog was there, but behind him stood others, dozens, all shapes and sizes, all glowing faintly with warmth, eyes bright, waiting. She turned and saw Jake, older than in the photo. Weathered kind? He spoke without moving his lips. You're the first in a long time to truly listen. What is this place? A bridge? A memory made living. It was broken once, but you've awakened it. Why me? Because you believed. The wind shifted. Mira looked back. Only the golden dog remained. It padded to her side, sat, pressed its head gently to her chest. There is work to do. Mira woke before dawn. The clearing was still, but in front of the tree, nestled in the moss, was a pendant, bone-carved, spiral-shaped. She reached for it with trembling fingers. The moment she touched it, a warmth spread through her. Familiar, ancient, alive. She stood, and somewhere in the distance, a bark echoed, not in dream, real. The hollow had awakened, and Mira was its new beacon. They came slowly, as before. A man who had lost a child, a woman with a box of ashes, a boy and his mutt, both survivors of a crash that left them afraid to sleep. Mira didn't guide them. She simply walked with them, and the hollow did the rest. No machines, no data, only stories, only listening. The pendant never glowed in the same way twice. Sometimes it pulsed, sometimes it went cold, sometimes it disappeared entirely until it was needed again. And the dogs? They came too, not always in body, but in bark, in breath, in dreams, and in moments when the forest held its breath, just long, enough to feel that someone somewhere still remembered the storm. Mira had learned to live in silence. The hollow did not require constant tending, only care, only presence. She visited the remembering tree each morning, pendant around her neck, journal in hand. She listened, she walked, she waited. One morning, as a spring mist blanketed the stones, she saw something new, a paw print, deep, precise, too large for any dog she knew, fresh. Mira knelt beside it, touched the edge. It was still warm. She rose slowly, the pendant growing heavy. On her chest, something had stirred in the hollow, something ancient. She followed the tracks. They led east, into the part of the woods where even birds stayed quiet. The path was overgrown, obscured by decades of thistle, branch, and bramble. But the paw prints were clear, as if the forest itself had bent around them in respect. The pendant glowed faintly, casting a spiral of gold light that pulsed with each step. Hours passed. The sky dimmed. Mira's muscles ached, but she kept moving. Eventually, the trail opened into a grove she had never seen, though the tree at its center felt familiar. It was not the remembering tree, it was older. Its bark was black and split. Its roots cracked the earth like old bones. Around it, the stones were carved in a language she did not know, but recognized from Jake's old journals. The first, tongue, and lying in front of the tree as still as a statue, was a golden lab, but not a living one. It was carved from stone, massive, detailed, except for its eyes, which were open, watching. Mira approached slowly. The carved lab never blinked, but somehow it breathed. Or perhaps the earth beneath it did. The pendant glowed brighter, tugging gently toward the statue's paw. In its stone grasp lay a small disc, smooth, etched with spirals, older than anything she had ever touched. The moment her fingers brushed it, the world changed. She fell, though not in body. Her mind plunged backward, through rain, fire, bone, bark and voice. She landed in the hollow, but 1,000 years ago. She saw a village, people with spiral tattoos and dogs at their sides. The dogs were different, not pets. Not tools, partners. Each one trained to follow grief and joy alike. She saw a young girl, barefoot, dark-haired, kneeling beside a dying grandmother. She saw the girl place a carved stone in her hand, whisper a name, and the grandmother smile. As the wind carried her last breath into the woods, the girl stood, and a golden dog padded to her side. Together, they walked into the hollow, not to bury, but to connect. The stone in her hand, the same spiral disc, pulsed. The forest glowed, and Mira knew this was the first ranger, the first of the guardians, born not of blood, but of memory. Then came the storm, not a natural one. A storm of men, conquerors, machines, fire. They cut the trees, captured the dogs, laughed at the carvings, demanded the secrets. The girl, the first keeper, fought to protect the hollow, but in the end, she fell. The golden lab stayed by her side until the last breath left her. Then it vanished into the woods and was never seen again until now. Mira awoke with a gasp. The statue was gone. In its place stood the real lab, golden, massive, eyes full of time, alive. It stepped forward, slow and sure, and nuzzled her hand. Then it sat, waited. Mira fell to her knees. "I saw her," she whispered. "I saw you." The lab wagged its tail once. She held out the spiral disc. "You're not just Ranger, you're the first." It lowered its head, and Mira understood. The lab had waited, slept, endured, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a promise. Mira brought the first Ranger back to the hollow. The remembering tree bent slightly as they entered. Leaves stirred. Stones pulsed. The pendant glowed brighter than ever before. That night, dreams came not only to Mira, but to others. Across towns, cities, mountains, people woke with visions of golden fur and spiral bark. The hollow's memory was spreading, not as a secret, but as a seed. And in the center of it all, a young woman and an ancient dog waited, not for the storm, but for the next beacon. It arrived by post. No return address, no stamp, just a wax seal with a spiral pattern. Mira sat at the table in the hollow's caretaker lodge. The first ranger curled at her feet. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, handwritten in old ink. "To the new beacon, the hollow has awakened. Others will follow. The network sleeps, but not for long. If the spiral finds you again, go to where the sky splits stone. Coordinates below. You are not alone." Beneath the note were numbers, latitude and longitude, somewhere in the high desert. The note smelled faintly of pine smoke and metal. The pendant around Mira's neck grew hot. The first ranger raised his head. It was time to leave the hollow. She flew west, traded the hollow's emerald hush for the dry echo of canyons. The coordinates led her to an unmarked trail near Shiprock, New Mexico, where mesas clawed at the sky and shadows whispered along red rock walls. She hiked for hours until the earth opened beneath her feet. A crack in the desert floor, a narrow crevice, just wide enough for her to slip into. She lowered herself carefully. The air changed instantly, cooler, older. At the bottom was a door, stone, circular, etched in spirals, and beside it, another dog, not golden black, with deep copper eyes. It sat in silence, watching her. Then it stood, circled the stone disc once and pressed its paw against a specific spiral. The door opened. Inside was a chamber of light. Hollowed from stone, its walls glowed faintly with energy. Spirals everywhere, carved, painted, suspended in strands of wire and crystal, and in the center a pedestal. On it, a map. No continents, no borders, only pulses of gold light. Mira gasped. There were dozens of points scattered across the globe, each pulsing in time with the pendant on her chest. Some were faint. One where she stood was bright. Another, back in the hollow, shone like fire, and others were dark, dead. The first ranger padded forward, staring silently at the map. Mira placed her pendant against the pedestal. The lights rippled. A recording began to play. Beacon Protocol 1. Reconnect the spiral. Memory is more than history. It is the foundation of all peace. Where memory fails, war begins. You are a beacon now. Your task is not preservation, it is activation. Find the others. Wake the network. The map identified 3 active signals. A lighthouse in Iceland, where the auroras tangled with memory. A monastery in northern Japan, long abandoned but rumored to be haunted by silent monks and dogs that never age. A ruin in Kenya's Great Rift Valley, where rock paintings match the same spiral language. Mira chose the closest, Iceland. The flight was rough. She had never seen snow whip horizontally across a sea. But when she arrived, the lighthouse was waiting, half collapsed, half frozen, and inside a boy, 16, blind in one eye. He called himself Rurik, and he had seen her in dreams. He had lived alone since he was 13, after his father vanished during a storm. Every week, he lit the lighthouse from a solar-powered coil, so the memory wouldn't freeze. He showed Mira his notebook, sketches of dogs he had never met, pages of spirals. One entry simply read, "She carries gold. She comes with the storm. She wakes the world." Mira showed him the pendant. His eyes widened. Then he stood, walked to a corner of the lighthouse, and lifted a stone panel. Beneath it was another pendant, black spiral etched in frost metal. He handed it to her. "I think it's yours now." As Mira returned to the hollow, the network pulsed brighter. 2 more beacons activated, one in the jungles of South America, one beneath an ancient glacier in the Himalayas, and the dreams. They spread. Children dreamed of dogs they had never owned. Old people woke with songs they hadn't sung since childhood. Everywhere, spirals began to appear, etched into frost, traced in sand, drawn on school chalkboards by children who didn't know what they meant, and always accompanied by a bark, a whisper, a memory, waking. One night, back at the hollow, Mira stood beneath the stars. The map hovered in the air before her, projected by the pendant and the first ranger's breath. She saw 12 lights pulsing now, 12 beacons. The spiral was forming again. The network was reawakening. But something darker stirred on the edges of the map, something watching. The first ranger growled softly, ears back. Mira reached down, resting a hand on his head. She was no longer just a girl, no longer just a beacon. She was becoming the link, the center point through which the spiral flowed. And she knew the storm had not passed. It had only paused. The next would be bigger, not one of wind or rain, but of memory itself, and she would be ready. It started in South America. The beacon deep within the Peruvian rainforest had gone dark, not faded, dark. The pulsing signal disappeared overnight. When Mira accessed the network's interface, a strange anomaly hovered where the light had once glowed. Signal corrupted, inversion detected. She gathered the first ranger and Rurik, now her second in command, and prepared to travel. But before they could leave, a second beacon, Kenya, blinked erratically, and then a third, Japan. The spiral network was being attacked, not with fire, with forgetting. They called themselves the Cleaners. Once they were a secret division within, a global think tank created to study trauma recovery through controlled memory erasure. But their power had grown unchecked. When they discovered the spiral network decades ago, they tried to claim it, failing to decode the spirals. They turned to destruction. Their motto, peace through forgetting. Now they had returned, armed with new tech, memory nullifiers, devices that emitted high-frequency pulses to wipe neural imprints of the spiral. Where they walked, dreams faded, whispers silenced, dogs disappeared. They had already unlinked 3 beacons. Their next target, the hollow. Mira prepared as best she could. She summoned every awakened beacon. Rurik from Iceland, Nyambura from Kenya, Yuto from Japan, Luca from Brazil, Anya from the Himalayas, and 4 others, each bonded to a memory dog with bloodlines older than written language. They met beneath the remembering tree. The first ranger stood at the center, eyes glowing like stars. Mira spoke. "We are the holders of memory, but we do not fight to preserve the past. We fight so the world can choose to remember it." The Cleaners arrived at dawn. Black uniforms, soundless drones, dogs barking, warning. The hollow's trees bent to shield the inner grounds. The remembering stones hummed. The pendant around Mira's neck glowed like fire. Then the first wave hit. The Cleaners unleashed nullifiers. Sonic pulses blasted into the hollow, shattering memory imprints, severing links. Mira staggered as her childhood flickered, her mother's lullaby vanishing, reforming. The first ranger howled. It wasn't a cry of pain, it was command. Across the field, the beacons and their dogs howled back. The hollow responded. Roots surged from the ground, vines wrapped around drones, stones vibrated with ancient frequencies, disrupting the nullifiers. The cleaners fought harder, deploying memory mists, clouds of amnesia that ate memory like acid. Rurik fell, clutching his pendant. Nyambura screamed as her dog collapsed mid-run, but Mira stood firm. She activated the central spiral, and the hollow answered. Deep beneath the remembering tree, an ancient chamber opened. It had no door before. Now it called to her. She descended, the first ranger beside her. Inside was a spiral altar made of bone and crystal. She placed her pendant on it. The network map unfurled, no longer as a projection, but as reality. Mira saw the world, not as it was, but as it remembered itself. Old beacons, ancient spirals, and at the center of it all, a single golden flame. The first spiral, dormant, sleeping, waiting to be reignited. She reached out and touched it. A shockwave burst from the hollow, visible across continents. Dogs lifted their heads in distant towns. Children blinked with sudden déjà vu. The cleaners froze. Their devices sputtered, overloaded by too much memory. The flame Mira had touched spread across the network, not as fire, story. The ground beneath the hollow cracked open, revealing images, names, smells, sounds long buried. The spiral didn't preserve memory by locking it away. It made it beautiful, living. The cleaners dropped their nullifiers. Some screamed, others wept. They remembered their own losses, their own buried pains, and understood at last why forgetting had never healed them. The battle ended without blood, but not without change. The hollow now pulsed like a heart. The cleaners disbanded. Some joined the beacons, now rebranded as the Spiral Keepers. More beacons awakened. The full map lit, 36 total, each with a guardian dog, each tied to a location where memory still whispered. But danger hadn't passed. The cleaners had only been tools. Someone, something, had given them the tech, had whispered to them that forgetting was safety. That entity remained hidden, watching, waiting for Mira to make one mistake. On the edge of the hollow, Mira sat with the first ranger. The stars above aligned briefly into a spiral. A wind carried voices, lullabies from the past, a baby's laugh, a father's whisper, the sound of paws over wet leaves. Mira turned to her. Journal wrote 3 words. We remember everything. Then she looked to the west. The next beacon pulsed from the ocean floor, and the war was not over. It had only changed. Now, it wasn't between remembering and forgetting. It was between truth and control. And truth, as Mira had learned, was wild, like the wind, like a bark in the night. Mira stood at the edge of the Atlantic, the salt wind tearing through her hair as waves crashed violently against the jagged rocks. In front of her, the map of the spiral network hummed with energy, pulsing bright in the dim twilight. This was it, the deepest beacon, beneath the ocean floor, at the heart of the black spiral. For months the coordinates had shifted, but the signal remained strong, anchored beneath the water like an unspoken truth. Only the bravest, or perhaps the most foolish, would attempt to reach it. But Mira wasn't alone. Rurik stood beside her, his eyes determined, the pendant now hanging around his neck. He had followed her through every trial, from the deserts of Iceland to the rainforests of Brazil. Now he would follow her into the heart of the abyss, and the first ranger, his golden fur beginning to glisten even in the cool ocean air, was ready to descend into the unknown. Mira checked the coordinates once more, marked for a submerged trench miles below the surface, a place few had dared to visit. We're ready, she said, her voice firm. Let's go. Rurik nodded, his breath steady, even as the roar of the ocean intensified. The small boat was prepared. It would carry them into the depths, to the place where the spiral had first cracked the world in two, a place no human or dog had ever come back from. The descent began in silence. Mira clutched the pendant, watching as the last remnants of light faded away. The water around them grew darker, colder. The world above, so familiar and real, seemed so distant now, as if it no longer belonged to them. The boat's hull creaked under the strain of the deep. Around them the ocean stretched endlessly, The map pulsed ever more brightly, glowing faintly in the water, illuminating the path ahead. The first ranger remained at the bow, watching the abyss, as if sensing the ancient power they were approaching. Hours passed. The depths seemed endless. Mira felt the pressure begin to build in her ears, but she pushed on. This wasn't just a journey, it was a reawakening. The spiral, Rurik said, breaking the silence. It's not just memory, is it? It's something more. Mira nodded. It is everything, she replied softly. It's how we remember and why we forget. It was meant to unite the world, but somewhere along the way it was broken. Rurik glanced at her, eyes full of unspoken questions. But before he could ask more, the boat began to shake. The water around them pulsed, sending ripples through the abyss. The pendant around Mira's neck flared with light. "We're here," Mira whispered. The boat lurched to a halt. They were no longer floating in the ocean. They had arrived at the entrance to something ancient, something forgotten by time. Before them, the ocean floor split open like a gaping wound, a massive chasm leading deep into the Earth's crust. At the center of the chasm, a swirling mass of black tendrils stretched toward the sky, twisting and coiling in unnatural patterns. This was the black spiral, the core from which the spiral network had originally grown, both the origin and the wound. The pendant glowed brighter, resonating with the energy of the black spiral. Mira's heart beat faster, recognizing the gravity of the moment. "Do we go down there?" Rurik asked, his voice barely audible above the rising wind and crashing waves. "We have no choice," Mira said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "This is where it all began. We have to see it, understand it." She gestured toward the jagged rocks surrounding the chasm. "Get ready. The spiral is more than a memory. It's the key to everything, the past, the present, the future. If we can reconnect it, we can heal the fractures, but if we fail," Rurik nodded, "we won't fail." They descended into the chasm. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became, thick with ancient power. The walls of the trench were covered in spirals, carved, burned, and etched into the very rock. The black spiral pulsed in time with the pendant, as if it recognized Mira's presence waiting for her to come closer. At the bottom of the trench, a massive stone door stood, weathered and ancient, covered in symbols older than civilization itself. The spiral etched into the door was different from the ones they had seen before. This was the first spiral. The door opened slowly as they approached, and Mira stepped inside. She was greeted by a sight beyond comprehension. A cavern, vast and endless, filled with swirling, glowing spirals of light. But at its center was a massive ancient stone, polished and smooth, radiating a soft warmth. It was a heart, alive, beating with the rhythm of the earth itself. And as Mira approached it, she felt a presence, not human, not animal, ancient. "It's alive," Mira whispered, her voice trembling with awe. The first ranger moved forward, as if recognizing something. He growled low, his eyes narrowing as he approached the stone. Then from the darkness a figure appeared. It was a man, tall, cloaked in shadow, his face hidden in the depths of the cave. But Mira felt the weight of his gaze, heavy and unyielding. "You've come," the figure said, his voice deep and resonant. "Who are you?" Mira asked, stepping forward. The figure chuckled softly. "I am the one who began the spiral, the one who saw its potential." Rurik took a step back. You created this?" "Not created," the figure replied, stepping closer. "I awakened it. It is not a creation. It is a force that binds all things." Mira's heart pounded. What happened to the spiral? Why is it broken? The figure's eyes gleamed in the darkness. Because of them, the ones who feared its power, they chose to divide it, to control it. But you've come to reunite it, to awaken the true spiral. Mira stepped closer, placing her hand on the stone. How the figure looked down at her with a knowing gaze. "You already know. The spiral lives in you, in all of you who are connected. You've been chosen." The stone pulsed beneath Mira's hand, sending ripples of light through her entire body. She felt the weight of the decision she had to make. The truth of the spiral was within her grasp, but with it came a power greater than anything she had ever imagined. She could restore the spiral to its original form, uniting the fractured pieces of memory and reconnecting the world. But that would require everything. Her life, her essence, her very soul. Or she could choose to leave it broken, to let the spiral continue to pulse in fractured pieces, keeping the world as it was, divided, scarred. The man's voice echoed in her mind, The spiral is not just about memory. It is the key to the future. The choice is yours. The first ranger stood beside her, his eyes glowing with the same ancient understanding. Mira looked at him, and in that moment she realized the truth. The spiral was not a tool to be used. It was a bond, a connection that could heal or destroy. She took a deep breath and made her choice. The moment Mira made her choice, the cavern trembled. The stone beneath her hand pulsed with a warmth that spread through her veins, and for the briefest of moments, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then a massive wave of light erupted from the core of the black spiral, engulfing everything in its path. Mira's heart raced as she felt the power of the spiral surge through her, wrapping around her very soul. The first ranger stood by her side, his body alight with the same energy, his golden fur glowing with ethereal light. The black spiral began to unravel, not breaking, but transforming, blooming outward like a living, breathing organism. The symbols, carved into the walls of the cavern, came to life, swirling into intricate patterns that danced across the space, filling it with a radiance that no human eye had ever witnessed. As the light intensified, Mira's mind expanded. She saw the past, the present, and the future, memories flooding her consciousness like a river breaking through a dam. The spiral was no longer a fragmented thing, fractured by fear and control. It was whole again, an endless, interconnected flow of thought, emotion, and experience. And it was hers to guide. In that moment, Mira knew the truth. The spiral was not just a tool for remembering, it was the bridge that connected all lives. It was the foundation of every story, every moment, every relationship. It was the heartbeat of existence. But the power of the spiral came with a cost. The vision faded as quickly as it had come. Mira staggered back, breathless, the weight of her decisions settling on her shoulders. The first ranger, eyes glowing brighter than ever, stepped forward and nuzzled her gently, grounding her in the present. Rurik, who had been watching in awe, now approached, his face full of questions. "Is it done?" he asked softly. Mira nodded, her voice hoarse. Yes, the spiral is reborn, but she knew nothing would ever be the same. News of the spiral's resurrection spread like wildfire. The beacons across the world felt the surge of energy, the rebirth of the spiral, and began to connect once more. But not all responded with gratitude. Across the world, in the hidden recesses of government agencies, corporate boardrooms, and secretive laboratories, old enemies stirred. The cleaners had never truly disappeared. Their organization, though fragmented and scattered, had always been waiting for a moment like this, and that moment had arrived. A shadowy figure, known only as the Director, watched as the spiral reconnected the world. He knew that this was the beginning of the end. The cleaners had been working in secret for years, building a new weapon that could sever the spiral completely. A device capable of erasing not just memories but the very essence of existence itself. They would stop at nothing to reclaim control. Mira had awakened the spiral, but now the fight to protect it would begin. Back in the hollow, the beacons gathered. Mira had called them together to discuss what lay ahead. The network of memories was stronger than ever, but it was fragile, and there were those who would seek to destroy it. Rurik stood beside her, his expression grim. "The cleaners will come for us, Mira. They won't let this stand." Mira nodded. No, we have to be ready." The first ranger stood next to her, his head held high as if sensing the gravity of the situation. Mira reached out and touched his fur, feeling the bond between them, stronger now than ever before. She turned to the others, the beacons who had traveled from all corners of the world to stand with her. Nyambura from Kenya, her dog Nia by her side, stepped forward. "We cannot let them tear this down. The spiral is more than just memory. It is our future." Yuto from Japan, his dog Hachi, silent but watchful, nodded. "We've seen the fractures, the gaps. The spiral has to remain whole if we're to move forward." Anya from the Himalayas, a quiet, resolute presence, looked at Mira. "How do we fight something that can erase us from existence?" Mira met her gaze, unwavering. "We fight with everything we have. The spiral is not just a tool, it is a living force. And we are its guardians." They had a choice to make, stand and fight or allow the spiral to be destroyed. Mira knew there was no turning back. The world was waking up, remembering what had been lost. But that also meant facing the darkness of those who wanted to suppress it. The battle for the future of memory was about to begin. It came without warning. One night, as the beacons prepared for what they knew was coming, A massive breach tore through the spiral's defenses. The first sign was a violent flicker in the map of the spiral, a crack that spread through the network, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Mira's heart skipped a beat. "It's them," she whispered. Rurik's voice was low and urgent. "We need to act now." The cleaners had made their move. Mira and Rurik led a team of beacons to the hollow's central chamber, where the spiral's power was concentrated. The first ranger stood at their side, alert and ready for whatever came next. The air was thick with tension as the ground beneath their feet trembled. Then the doors to the hollow burst open. In a blinding flash of light, the cleaners appeared, dressed in sleek black uniforms, their leader, the director, at the forefront, surrounded by a ring of soldiers armed with advanced weapons. But it wasn't their weapons that terrified Mira. It was the device they carried, a strange glowing orb that pulsed with an unnatural energy. The director stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "You've awakened it," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You've given the spiral power, but you've made a grave mistake." Mira stood firm, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to rise within her. "We gave the spiral the chance to heal. You wanted to destroy it because you feared what it could become." The director's smile was cruel. "Fear? No, Mira. We want control, and we will have it. The spiral belongs to us. It always has." He raised the orb, and the world began to shake. The fight erupted in an instant. Mira and the beacons faced off against the cleaners, their weapons crackling with energy. The first ranger launched himself into the fray, his growls fierce and unyielding. The beacons fought alongside their dogs, each one using their unique bond with the spiral to defend it. But the cleaners had an advantage. The orb they carried pulsed with power, sending out waves of distortion that erased memories in an instant. Those caught in the blast faltered, disoriented, their minds fractured. Mira could feel it. The pull of the orb. It was weakening the spiral, pulling it apart, erasing the threads that held it together. She reached for the pendant around her neck, the heart of the spiral, and felt the surge of energy coursing through her. "We can't let them win," she whispered. With a roar, she charged toward the director, her heart pounding. The first ranger was at her side, fangs bared, ready to fight to the death. But as they neared the director, something shifted. The orb's light flickered, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to pause, as if time itself had taken a breath. Mira reached out, her hand trembling as she touched the orb. And in that moment, everything changed. Mira's hand trembled as she touched the orb, its energy pulsing violently against her skin. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The world around her, the chaos of the battle, the blinding light stilled. The director's cold eyes bore into hers, as if daring her to make a move. "You think you can control it?" he sneered. "You think you can save it?" "The spiral isn't meant to be a savior, Mira. It's a weapon. It always has been." Mira felt the truth of his words echo in her mind. The spiral was a weapon. It was capable of creating, but also of destroying. She could feel the weight of that power, the potential for both creation and annihilation, as she stood before the director. But there was something else, too, something ancient, something beyond the director's control. The spiral was more than just a weapon. It was the heartbeat of memory, of life itself. It was the pulse of existence. "It's not yours to control," Mira said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. She gripped the orb tighter. "The spiral doesn't belong to anyone. It's a force of nature, just like the wind or the ocean, and you can't erase that." For a brief moment, Mira could feel the connection to the spiral grow stronger, as if the very fabric of the world was holding its breath. She could hear the faint whispers of memories, of lives lived, of moments lost and found. She felt the weight of it all. The director's smile faltered. "You fool," he spat. "You don't understand the consequences of your actions. The spiral will tear everything apart." But Mira wasn't listening to him anymore. She could feel the first ranger by her side, his golden fur glowing with the same power that surged through her veins. His presence grounded her, giving her strength. She knew what she had to do. "No," she whispered. "It will heal, not tear." With one final surge of willpower, Mira pressed her hand fully against the orb. For a moment, the world seemed to fracture. The orb pulsed with an intense, blinding light, sending waves of energy through the cavern, shaking the walls, distorting reality. Mira felt herself falling, as if the ground beneath her had been ripped away. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the light faded, and everything was still. Mira gasped for air, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened her eyes, blinking against the darkness, and saw nothing but the soft glow of the spiral, now free from the cleaner's grasp. The orb lay shattered at her feet, its power spent. The director was gone, vanished into the ether, his form erased from existence, as if the spiral had decided he no longer had a place in this world. But Mira knew that the battle wasn't over. The cleaners were still out there, and the world had not yet fully healed. The spiral was reborn, but it would take time for its energy to settle, to stabilize, to heal the fractures that had scarred the world. The first ranger stood beside her, his head high, watching the aftermath. His golden fur glowed in the dim light, and for a moment Mira swore she saw something in his eyes, something that spoke of ancient knowledge, of a past long forgotten, and of a future yet to unfold. Rurik approached, his expression tired but resolute. "Did we win?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mira nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the spiral, which now seemed to pulse in a rhythmic, soothing pattern. "For now," she said, "but this is just the beginning." In the weeks that followed, Mira and the beacons worked tirelessly to rebuild what the cleaners had tried to destroy. The spiral had been reborn, but its power was fragile. It had to be nurtured, protected, and integrated back into the world. The beacons reconnected with their respective networks, reaching out to others who had once been part of the spiral. They healed the fractures, strengthened the bonds, and began the long process of rebuilding the memories that had been lost. But the cleaners were not done. They had regrouped, scattered across the world, preparing for their next move. They had always feared the power of the spiral, and they would not rest until it was destroyed completely. Mira knew the war wasn't over. The cleaners would return, more determined than ever. They would try to sever the spiral again, to rip apart the threads of memory, to erase the future. But Mira had a plan. She had seen the truth in the spiral, that it was not just a network of memories, but a force of connection, a force that could not be destroyed by force alone. She had seen the way the spiral could be woven into the very fabric of existence, how it could bind the world together in ways no one had ever imagined. The key to defeating the cleaners was not just to fight back, but to make the spiral unbreakable. And so Mira began her work. She and the beacons traveled to the far corners of the world, to places where the spiral had once been strongest. They sought out the lost memories, the forgotten places, the forgotten people. They restored the threads of the spiral, weaving them into the fabric of life itself. It wasn't an easy task. The cleaners fought back at every turn, sabotaging their efforts, sending waves of erasure through the networks, trying to undo everything they had worked for. But Mira and the beacons were relentless. They fought not with weapons, but with the power of memory, the power of connection. Each time the cleaners struck, the spiral grew stronger. Each time a memory was erased, it was replaced with another. The spiral was no longer just a network. It was a living thing, constantly evolving, adapting, healing itself. And with each victory, the cleaners' hold on the world weakened. It came down to one last confrontation. Mira stood at the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping through her hair, staring out over the horizon. The sun was setting, casting the world in a warm, golden glow. The spiral was alive beneath her feet, pulsing softly, a constant presence in the background of her thoughts. Rurik stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, the first ranger at his side. "It's over, isn't it?" Rurik asked, his voice filled. With quiet understanding, Mira nodded. "For now." But the battle for memory is never truly over. The world had changed, irrevocably. The spiral had been reborn, but it was fragile. It would take time to heal the wounds of the past, to rebuild the connections that had been lost. But Mira knew that as long as the beacons stood together, as long as the spiral remained intact, there was hope. And far away, in the heart of the earth, the spiral continued to pulse, a living, breathing force connected to every soul, every story, every memory. It was unbreakable. For now. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe this channel. We worked so hard finding and working on these stories.